The Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, the CSIR, monitors the hours of power cuts, the stages of load shedding and how it's impacting the country. Now, recently the CSIR released data that showed emphatically just how much worse load shedding has been this year. Now, that was in November. And now with stage 6, even in December, when industry normally eases off on its electricity consumption. Let's get an update. I'm joined now by a senior researcher at the CSIR, Monique le Roux. Monique, thank you so much for joining us. So the picture was pretty dire when we spoke last in November. Update us, how much worse is it now?
Thank you, Sally. Yes, obviously everyone is feeling the pinch and everyone knows that it's gotten worse. We haven't seen any let up in the load shedding. We've experienced constant load shedding since the last time that we released our data at the end of October. We've seen at the end of October, we were looking at a 230% increase compared to 2021. At the moment, we're looking at a 260% increase compared to 2021, with a total of 6,400 gigawatt hours of unserved energy in the country just for 2022.
Wow, I mean, it's astonishing. So a 260% increase on 2021. Are you able to translate that into impact on the economy?
Yes, absolutely. If we look at the cost of unserved energy, basically it costs the country around 87 Rand per kilowatt that's not supplied. That's what the cost to the economy. So if we look at the total number of hours that are unserved, we're looking at around 560 billion Rand that has been lost this year alone to the economy due to load shedding.
And that's not even, am I correct, factoring in the reality of what Mobile was telling us, is that businesses, both small and big, are now looking at what sort of backup they need to get in place. So we're not even factoring that in, or have you factored that in as well?
Well, the way that we calculated it is we look at Eskom's data themselves and they see that this is the energy that they cannot serve. So that's basically all the load that they couldn't supply for any period during the time of 2022. So that doesn't look at businesses and their own supply, but that looks at basically anyone that was sitting without electricity during the period of load shedding.
Wow, so it's likely worse than that. Talk to me about December. We know that normally December, well, most businesses close, construction slows down. Look, we're not quite here. That normally around 16, 15 December, everything shuts up. But one would have expected surely by now not to be sitting in stage 6. What's your December outlook?
So we recently looked at that data, and it's actually quite interesting to see that the demand really only starts dropping from the middle of December, and only towards the 22nd, 25th, we see a real drop in demand. So around that time in December, we're looking at about a drop of 2,000 megawatts that will carry through until the beginning of January. So hopefully during that period of time, 2,000 megawatts, we'll see 2 less stages of load shedding, but it's only really for a limited period of time from the middle of December to the beginning of January.
Yeah, and also with Coburg, a unit going offline, that's at least 650 megawatts. That's already not going to be factored in. So that's obviously going to have an impact as well. Obviously, we heard today new power projects, IPP signed, and there's this process unfolding as we speak. You've also taken a look at these sort of future projects and when they're meant to come online. We're always told we're going to see a marked difference in 2 years. Do you think that time frame is realistic?
Sally, honestly, this morning has been quite disappointing for many people in the industry. They've only announced 5 solar projects. Everyone was looking for around 4,800 megawatts of new generation to be announced, and they've only announced basically a new additional 1,000 megawatts that will be added to the grid in the next 2 years. And from our research and the work that we've been doing, the only possible reason for that is the fact that there isn't capacity on the grid anymore to connect more viable wind power projects. So that means that we're looking at quite a dire outlook in the coming years, and the government is going to struggle increasingly to get new generation onto the grid, basically.
Just explain that to me. When you say there won't be enough capacity on the grid. And the reason I'm asking that is, first of all, I don't understand the technicalities of that. And also, we keep hearing the energy minister saying, give me 6 months, I'll sort out load shedding. There's enough capacity. We just need to fix all these problems, and then the grid will be fine. What do you mean by talking about capacity on the grid regarding IPPs?
So certainly what we've been seeing is that there's been a lot of investment and a lot of emphasis on getting renewable energy onto the grid. But unfortunately, those energy and resources, good wind resources, good solar resources, are located in provinces, for instance, the Northern Cape, Western Cape, Eastern Cape, where there isn't a lot of demand. So then the resources are sitting there, but you don't have good grid infrastructure to get that power out of those areas in the Northern Cape, Western Cape, and Eastern Cape back to the north of the country where there's a high load demand. So what we're sitting with at the moment is that those lines that carry the power from the south of the country, where the good wind resource is, has been completely utilized. So they're running at full capacity. So it isn't possible to add any more generation to serve load in the north of the country. For solar, it's a bit easier. You can add solar anywhere in the country because the resource is sort of linear throughout most of the country. But unfortunately, the solar resource generation profile doesn't match the country's demand profile very well, as people could understand that in the mornings and the evenings you don't have good wind, solar resource, and that's our peak demand periods that need to be served. So it's going to just become increasingly difficult to serve the demand with the renewables that is available and that can be connected to the grid.
But of course we all hear about batteries now, that you can store that solar in a battery. Won't that deal with the peak times when there isn't enough sun?
It's not an easy question to answer, but I think if we need to give an answer to that, it's really going to increase grid costs enormously if we have to rely on battery storage alone to try and catch those morning and evening peaks. Eskom today said that they started the rollout of their battery energy storage program, but the amount of battery that they're putting on the system is infinitely too small to supply any sort of needs in terms of making a dent in load shedding. So I think the sort of perception throughout the industry and everyone working around this is that it's going to be difficult to solve our problems with battery alone.
So bearing in mind all of that, how long, you know, we're kind of being told, brace yourself for another 2 years of load shedding. How long do you think we should plan for load shedding?
So certainly from our plans and from what we've been doing, the outlook unfortunately doesn't look good, and we don't foresee that we're going to have good news in the next couple of years. It looks like the notion that load shedding will be gone in 2 years is definitely not watertight, and it does not stand. If you look at the energy availability factor of Eskom's current plant, it just seems to decline. So it just means that we can't rely on Eskom's current plant. It looks like on average their plants are 40 years old. They run the plants and stress the plants, and we're seeing more and more breakdowns. That's definitely the trend, and getting more renewables on the grid is also difficult, as I explained. So the only possible solution is to go and build large lines, big infrastructure projects so that you can supply the north of the country through these lines, through the grid. And those plans are unfortunately 10 years in the making. Building those lines that stretch the length and breadth of the country, we're looking at a timeline of around 10 years to complete those projects. And even new base capacity probably is also going to be a significant number of years before we see any of that onto the grid.
Are you saying we might have another 10 years of load shedding?
It's a very difficult question to answer, but if I had to take a guess, looking at all the data that is in front of us, that's definitely a possible scenario that we're sitting with at the moment.
Thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. That is Monique le Roux, Senior Researcher at the CSIR. And